The story of Fleetwood Mac is one of the most incredible sagas in pop music history. The band has survived in different lineups for over 27 years, but sometimes the price paid by individual members has been high. For along with major artistic and commercial success have come breakdowns, both marital and mental, drug and alcohol addictions, disappearances, and crippling legal battles. At the heart of all the incarnations of the band has been the rhythm section of John McVie and Mick Fleetwood. The story begins when an adolescent Mick Fleetwood committed himself to a life in pop music.
I used to go to this huge oak tree at one of my boarding schools and swear and pray that I'm going to be in London, I'm going to do this, and tears pouring down my face, just committing myself to this thing.
Mick fulfilled his dream of going to London. Spotted one day playing the drums, he was asked to join a group called the Shames.
It was like great drum kit. They really didn't, I don't think they gave a damn about how I played it. It was the kit, you know, like, God, he's got a full kit, you know, it's brand new.
Mick approached me and asked me to be the manager of the band for the sole reason that I had a brown mohair suit and nobody else did. After a couple of weeks, they asked me to come with them and play keyboards. And actually, that didn't do too bad. I mean, we started doing the circuit, and it was a pretty good R&B band at the time.
The other half of what was to become the Fleetwood Mac rhythm section, John McVie, was working for the Inland Revenue, but he wanted to be a professional musician. His chance came with an audition for John Mayall's Blues Breakers.
My dad dropped me off there with my amp and stuff, and I went in there and Mayall said, well, play a blues in C, 12 bar in C. Not quite sure what a 12 bar is, because we've done all this shadow stuff, and then it sort of went on from there. He pointed me in the right direction and said, listen to this, and then play what you feel.
While John was learning the blues, the other founder member of Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green, was trying to get a chance to play lead guitar. It came when he joined Peter B's Lunars and teamed up with Mick Fleetwood and Peter Bardens, who had both left the Shames.
So we set up a rehearsal, and at that time, Pete maybe knew about 2 or 3 licks.
Me and Dave Ambrose, I will certainly say me, said to Peter Bardens, I don't think he's good enough.
I knew that Mick and Dave weren't impressed. They're going, hey man, this guy only knows a couple of licks. I'm saying, yeah, but you don't have to play them good.
Peter B's Lunars became Shotgun Express with the addition of vocalists Rod Stewart and Beryl Marsden. Bandleader Peter Bardens had to make sure everyone turned up for gigs.
It was a drag in a way, because I had to go around picking everybody up, and Beryl was always having her hair done. I had to pick her up for some hairdressers somewhere, and Rod was always like asleep with some bird.
In those days, Peter would get pretty peeved at Rod's ability to disconnect from the general populace of the band, and I think that's probably what was the kiss of death.
After the demise of Shotgun Express, Peter Green replaced Eric Clapton in the Blues Breakers, teaming up with John McVie and John Mayall.
Peter made himself known out of the audience to me several times, criticising the people I'd got on stage, saying that he was much better than they were and wanted to give him a shot. So eventually I did give him a chance, because he was so persistent and becoming quite a nuisance.
He was a very cocky punk. Let me play.
Peter Green wanted Mick Fleetwood in the Blues Breakers. It meant getting rid of existing drummer Ainsley Dunbar. Mick was invited to one of their gigs.
I went to the gig, and they hadn't told Ainsley he was leaving, and I felt awful.
Mick replaced Ainsley. Soon after this, the name Fleetwood Mac was coined. But originally, it was a title of a song, not a group.
Peter was celebrating whatever birthday it was, John Mayall very graciously said, for your birthday, I'm giving you 5-6 hours or whatever it was of studio time. And he asked me and John to do the session, and one of the songs was an instrumental, and it was called Fleetwood Mac. And that was the beginning, unbeknownst to any of us, of Fleetwood Mac.
This initial association between Peter, Mick and John was short-lived. Mick was fired by John Mayall for excessive drinking, something that John McVie had been in trouble for in the past.
He fired me twice for indulgence, as it were.
I was somewhat keeping up with McVie's indulgence, probably, which rendered me helpless, you know, and it happened a few times on stage, a few times too many for Mr. Mayall. Out of there, and I was gone.
In the summer of 1967, Peter Green took the fateful step of leaving the Blues Breakers and forming his own group. It was called Fleetwood Mac. He recruited guitarist Jeremy Spencer, and on drums was one half of his favourite rhythm section, Mick Fleetwood. The other half, however, wouldn't leave the security of the Blues Breakers.
I'm looking for somebody.
We wanted John there, he wouldn't leave John Mayall.
I was secure, I had a good, steady bucks coming in.
When John McVie refused to join, the band resorted to putting an ad in Melody Maker. It was answered by student teacher and semi-pro musician Bob Brunning.
I went round to the audition, and the guy opens the door, welcomes me in, and he says, "Yeah, I'm Peter Green." I said, "Oh," I said, "that's a good name to have for a blues player." I said, "Have you heard of, you know, the Peter Green who's in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, supposed to be better than Eric Clapton?" And he said, "You bloody idiot." He said, "I am that Peter Green."
Despite this, Bob got the job. Their first gig was the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival. From the beginning, they were a tightly knit group. Jeremy Spencer shared a flat with Bob Brunning.
He just got married, and he'd had his first baby like a month previously. Well, I'm kind of into babies, you know. So I said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that really exciting? How brilliant, you know. What is it? It's a girl." I said, "What's her name?" And he went, "Oh, I can't remember, Bob." How many people have we ever met who can't remember the name of their first baby? I mean, that's pretty strange.
Peter Green still wanted John McVie to join Fleetwood Mac. Luckily for him, McVie was having musical differences with Mayall.
We were rehearsing, we had a couple of horn players, and John turned around and said, "Okay, in this section, play Freeform." And that sort of, you know, being very, I'm a Chicago 12-bar, you know, very blinkered. Fucking jazz. I'm out of here. So I went across the street to a phone box and called Peter and said, "You want me in the band? I'm in."
I'm looking for somebody.
The classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac was complete, and the band recorded their first LP. They came to the attention of their future manager, Clifford Davis.
What attracted me to the band was twofold. One was the great mimicry of Jeremy Spencer. He was a great showman, and he mimicked people like John Mayall, he mimicked Elvis on stage, and did it very, very well indeed. But I think the overriding thing for me was the sheer brilliance and guitar showmanship of Peter Green. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Need someone's hand to lead me through the night. I need someone's arms to hold and squeeze me tight. Now when the night begins.
Peter Green's protege Danny Kerwin joined as third guitarist, and the band began their journey from being a blues outfit to chart toppers.
In the early days, within a certain context, it's definitely a blues band. Then he started writing, then things like Manalishi came up, and Oh Well. I went, wow.
About the shape I'm in, I can't sing, I ain't pretty, and my legs are thin. But don't ask me what I think of you, I might not give the answer that you want me to.
In 1969, Fleetwood Mac sold more records than the Beatles and the Stones put together. And ironically, all those songs were Peter Green songs. I mean, people nowadays, they think of Fleetwood Mac as Rumours and you know, maybe some of the albums that followed that. But what they have to realise is that the name Fleetwood Mac was actually launched by Peter Green's talent.
Now when I talked to God, I knew he'd understand. He said, stick by me and I'll be your guiding hand. But don't ask me what I think of you, I might not give the answer that you want me to.
I loved him. I adored him. You know, say it quite openly. It's just like we would sleep together, you know. And it was a brother. When it was cold, we would curl up in bed together and keep warm. You know, nothing sexual or anything. Don't get me wrong, but it was that close.
Peter Green was the musical driving force of the band, but as they became more successful, he became more uneasy.
He got terrified of the success and just thought, this is not, it's like, now I'm here, it's like, so what? He was very cruel to himself.
I guess I've got everything I need. I wouldn't ask for, and there's no one I'd rather be.
Jack the Lad, you know, it's wonderful. Until Munich.
What happened there?
That's when Peter got spiked.
Probably only Peter Green knows exactly what happened in Munich, but band members and friends are all agreed that after this encounter with acid, he was never the same again.
So black that the darkness cooks. You come creeping around, making me do things I don't want to do.
It's not just Pete, but I mean other people that have been spiked, especially with acid, and not knowing what it is. I mean, it can turn the whole world upside down. And maybe he never really recovered from that. It certainly screwed things up.
There was talk of, if we give all the money away we make, then maybe we can do this, and certainly myself, John was sort of halfway interested in doing that.
I went with it. Yeah, Pete, you're right. Yeah, and Mick was firmly anchored in reality. He said, John,
Peter wanted to give to charity the money earned from hits such as Albatross. He was beginning to distance himself from the rest of the band.
We did a tour of Scandinavia, and he came up the back of the bus and he said to me, I want to have a chat with you. And I said, what about? He said, I want to leave the band. And I said, why? And he said, they're not really cutting it, it's the truth.
felt he couldn't go any further. Maybe, who knows, with the band's playing abilities, I suspect there was some of that. But it was a spiritual thing as well. He was terribly tormented.
It was like taking the underpinnings out of a bridge. We were quite happily going along, turning this out. You know, everything we played was great. It's a great band. And then suddenly, the legs went out, and you went, whoops. And you were faced with a future without Peter.
We were shaky, and that's when I came up with the plan that we'd all live in this house called Kiln House, which was a converted oast house we rented. And that saved Fleetwood Mac, I think, from disintegrating.
That sounds like a good idea, so we went down and we smoked dope for about a year and tried to do an album. We had to go on the road, and we realized that we didn't have enough strength in the band. And Christine, who I was married to at that time, she was there as the dutiful wife.
Christine McVie had had success in several bands prior to this, but now decided to join her husband in Fleetwood Mac.
We just went, would you come and do the tour with us? And she said, yeah, I'd love to. And that was the beginning of her excursion.
The band left for the American tour. It was to be a fateful trip for guitarist Jeremy Spencer.
That was instigated by drugs. We were in San Francisco and we had been on mescaline. Thought we were American Indians or something there for a while.
We came down on a flight from San Francisco to LA, and it was the same day the big earthquake hit in Saugus. In fact, it happened while we were in the air, and I'm sitting next to Jeremy, and Jeremy's by the window. And he said, why am I doing this?
I got one photograph that I took, which turned out to be the last picture of Jeremy in Fleetwood Mac, was getting out of the back of one of those jets when you come down the back through the tail.
We shared a room at, I think it was the Hollywood Hawaiian or somewhere in that area. It's one, the rooms with a little kitchen in it. You had to go out and get your own food. So I'm just going to go out and get some groceries.
Never came back. They picked him off the street. Gone.
A few days later, it transpired that he'd turned up with the Children of God, and I went down to their headquarters. It was quite a frightening situation. I had to go in alone. Anyway, after about 2 hours of negotiating, he just walked out. He'd had his hair shaven, he'd changed his name. And I said, are you here of your own free will? And he said, yeah. He said, I feel at home here, Clifford.
In search of a new guitarist, Fleetwood Mac turned to American Bob Welch. His band, Head West, had broken up and he was down on his luck, living in Paris.
And I said, I'll be there in 2 seconds. Could you send me plane fare?
Bob flew to England to meet the band at their country retreat in Hampshire.
They were kind of saying, well, what are we really going to do? And have we been cursed? And, you know, is this the continual curse of the absconding guitar players? And is this new guy, you know, I mean, I knew I was being scrutinized not so much for my musical talents, but for my psychological soundness, shall we say.
He was totally different background, R&B, sort of jazzy. He brought his personality. I mean, he was a member of Fleetwood Mac before we'd even played a note.
Bob Welch joined, but found that the band was still under the spell of ex-guitarist Peter Green.
Peter Green most definitely haunted them. It was never expressed in so many words, and actually I would probably have been more happy if it had been. I knew there were certain guitar licks you did not try to play.
Peter Green had a brief solo career after leaving Fleetwood Mac and still kept in touch with the band. But when Bob Welch met him for the first time, he realised something was amiss.
He showed up, I'll never forget. His hair was all unkempt. You know, well, that's okay because this was the hippie era and people did have unkempt hair. In his hair, there was a piece of cheese stuck in his hair. I don't know what kind of cheese it was, if it was Care, Philly, or cheddar or not. But it was most definitely a piece of cheese. And it's, you know, he's got a piece of cheese in his hair. I know. And then I'll never forget the day that he left. He still had the same piece of cheese in his hair that he had come with 5 days earlier. I realized then that even for the hippie era, something was amiss. As free-spirited as I guess we all like to think we were. If I had a piece of cheese in my hair on Wednesday, Thursday, I can guarantee you it would be gone.
Guitarists Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer had both left the band in unusual circumstances. Danny Kirwan was next to succumb to the pressures of life in a rock group. His breaking point came while the band were on tour in the US.
He had a beautiful Black Beauty Les Paul guitar, a big 3 pickup, it was like 56, it was a gorgeous guitar. And he just took the guitar and just threw it against the tile wall, you know, boom, the guitar, boing.
I said, oh, fuck it. And spent the whole of the gig out by the board while we were up there playing away. And then had the temerity to come up afterwards and say, that was a nice show. Yeah.
Danny was a major part and had been a major part of this band. He was asked to leave. In essence, the blunt way of putting it is, you're fired. And I had to do that, and it was not good and it was not easy. I don't think he's ever forgiven me, really.
Danny departed and the band recruited 2 new members, singer Dave Walker and guitarist Bob Weston.
Danny had gone into a personal abyss. So they briefly explained it and said, you know, if you can bear with that and carry on, and one understands this happens, you know. In fact, it's a miracle I'm here. All 3 guitar players have gone a bit cacker except me.
Dave Walker did not last long and was asked to leave. Bob Weston stayed, but both he and Bob Welch felt a nagging sense of distance between themselves and the founder members of Fleetwood Mac.
It was like they were on some sort of mystical quest, or they had been, you know, by appointment to Her Majesty, you know, they had been given this thing, this mission to somehow accomplish, and I was never quite clued in on exactly what that mission might have been.
I felt like the new boy at school, which I quite resented, being a bit of a feisty little fella myself. I mean, if I was there, I wanted to be there. And it was rather irritating.
The band went on tour to America. It was to be a momentous trip for everyone, especially Bob Weston.
Mick and his wife were having a bit of a domestic, I suppose, you know. Well, they got married and divorced 3 times, so I mean, that's self-explanatory. There's something unresolved, wasn't it? And there I was.
Turned out that, you know, Mick and his wife Jenny, I guess were not getting along. This is, you know, been written about a couple different places over the years. Anyway, Bob was having an affair, I guess, with Jenny, or some way or other. They were phoning each other or something. Anyway, but we were also playing, you know, Bob was on stage every night with us, and Mick got wind of it, and I guess this was going on for maybe a week or something when he found out about it.
Friendship developed into love. We seemed to have fallen in love with each other. But in retrospect, I mean, it was an empathy, really. It was nothing obvious. We were born within an hour of each other, so there was a lot of empathy. And they were having a pretty rotten time, so, well, we had an affair. The most expensive affair I've ever had in my life. Cost me a career, that did.
So he was asked to leave. Please. But now.
I think now it's all right. Although he's a very peculiar man. I read his biography a couple of years ago. I thought it was wonderfully heartfelt, and I was so moved. Almost had a tear. I thought, I'm going to ring him up, just compliment him. Rung up. Yeah, it's Fleetwood's secretary here. Who's that? I said, well, it's Bob West. I want to talk to Mick Fleetwood. Not here at the moment. Can you leave a number? Yeah. And then 3 days later, the secretary rang up, said, what did you want him for? I thought, nothing. Bye. See? You miss it, Mick. Cheers.
There's no use in crying, it's all over. And I know there'll always be another day.
The band had cancelled the rest of the US tour and put all their plans on hold. What followed next was one of the most bizarre incidents in the history of the band. It all started with a mystery telegram.
I got home and there was this telegram, and it was top secret. Don't tell anybody, you know, but get in touch with this number, and, you know, more information will be given forthwith.
Keyboard player Dave Wilkinson rang the number and was invited to an audition at a rehearsal studio near King's Cross. He had his suspicions about what was happening.
Afterwards, we went to this little pub round the corner, and Clifford Davies, who I now realise who he was, said to me, "You've got the job." And I said, "What job?" And he said, basically, promise not to tell anybody. And I said, I think I know what it is. Fleetwood Mac?
I remember being in Mick's living room at the house we had, and it's called Benefort. It was me, Bob, and Mick, because Bob was staying there. Got the word that there's a fake Fleetwood Mac on the road.
It wasn't a bad band, to tell you the truth. I mean, we actually performed those old Fleetwood Mac numbers quite well. It's just none of the original Fleetwood Mac were there.
The original Fleetwood Mac entered into litigation with their manager. Meanwhile, the fake band went on a tour of the US, but soon ran into trouble.
When we got back to New York, there was people saying, where the hell's Mick Fleetwood, and we want the real Fleetwood Mac, and things like that. It was quite frightening, really. It was the first time in my life I really did think I was going to get shot. And, but luckily, Clifford had gone on before us and told the audience that he was the real Fleetwood Mac.
Do you have the rights to the name? And say, well, that is our name, isn't it? And we've played in the band since day one. I remember making a promotional in-house video for Warner's where we all sat and said, "Hi, I'm Bob Welch, and this is the real Fleetwood Mac. Will the real Fleetwood Mac please stand up?" And this was meant to go out to all the promotion guys and the guys that work for the record company, because they didn't know this. Oh, we don't know what's going on, you know. I spoke to Clifford about 6 months ago, and I accept his side of the story in terms of, because I don't want to feel any other way, but there was a lot of very bad blood for a long time.
The fake band changed their name to Stretch and went on to have a hit single. The real Fleetwood Mac eventually secured the rights to their name, but the whole episode prompted an important move for the quartet.
I tried to persuade, initially unsuccessfully, John and Chris that we live in America. Because I said, all we do is come back and we sit, you know, washing our cars and things in the driveway, and nothing's happening here. We can't even get arrested in England. You know, it's like the Fleetwood who? It was over. It's like...
Come a little bit closer, 'cause I remember the time.
Fleetwood Mac sold their house in Britain and moved to California, determined to revive their fortunes after the court case with their former manager. While they were settling in Los Angeles, a young singer who was to play a major part in their story was just beginning her musical career in San Francisco. Stevie Nicks was in a band called Fritz, but being the only woman was not always easy.
People would call up after they saw us a couple of times and say, can we book that band with that little brownie blonde-haired girl? And that would just make them intensely furious. And they would take it out on me. So it was a definite double standard. You know, they didn't treat me very well, but they did pay me the same amount of money that they got, because otherwise I would have quit.
After the draining legal battle Fleetwood Mac had been engaged in, Bob Welch had had enough. He wanted to strike out on his own.
I was just full of anxiety. I was kind of tired of the atmosphere, the sort of rather heavy, stuffy, maybe you could say, atmosphere. And you know, when you're in a band for 5 or 6 years, you see people every day. You know, I think we were all tired of each other.
He just quit. I'll never know why. He just said, that's it, I'm gone. He was gone.
I felt the clock was ticking on my ability to put out a whole lot of energy for long periods of time. I think it's called something, age.
Fleetwood Mac needed a new guitarist. Meanwhile, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham had left Fritz and recorded an LP. It failed to take off, and Stevie had to take a job as a waitress to make ends meet. Then, out of the blue, came the offer to join Fleetwood Mac. But the band at first were only interested in one half of the duo.
I was aware of them coming as a package pretty early on, but there was a point where I was truly after Lindsey Buckingham. And the fact that Stevie was an afterthought is why she never forgave me.
How dare this, you know, California bimbo, which is how they looked at me, come in and walk out into the center of our stage and be the lead singer overnight. How dare she? They realized really quickly that I wasn't trying to take anything away from them, and I wasn't. And I really did love them and want them to be wonderful. And I certainly didn't want to take anything away from Chris, because I liked her and I respected her, and she was really nice to me, and she was my only friend.
The band quickly gelled as a unit and recorded the Fleetwood Mac album, producing such hits as Rihanna. While Fleetwood Mac was on the verge of great success, ex-guitarist Bob Welch had formed a band called Paris. It had a very different sound to the old Fleetwood Mac.
Now I might have took the priesthood, but I ran into Don Juan. I dropped the clothes.
Boy, the first time everybody in Fleetwood Mac heard that, they said, what is this garbage you've done? It's sort of like you've disgraced us with this aberration, with this thing. What if, oh, ooh. You know, get it out of my hands. Oh, they didn't like it at all. And kind of, I must say, I must admit and confess to taking a certain degree of satisfaction in that.
In Fleetwood Mac, the arrival of Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham had musically reinvigorated the band. But when they came to record the multi-million selling LP Rumours, the personal relationships that lay at the heart of their success were close to breaking point.
We'd had a tremendously successful album with Fleetwood Mac, and there we were making the follow-up with everyone basically not talking to each other.
It was really touch and go, because the slightest wrong word from one person could completely throw the session.
Things were happening in lives, you know, people go, fuck you, screw you. Well, okay, I'll screw you, you screw me. I think the only ones that didn't have an affair were me and Mick.
When people break up, it's not a pretty picture. It's especially not a pretty picture if you even think that that person might be going to go see somebody else. Or they didn't come down for dinner tonight. Well, where are they? You know, or oh, she didn't answer her phone. Where is she? It was unacceptable.
You can go your own way. Go your own way. You can call it another lonely day.
Rumours took the music scene by storm and became the second biggest selling LP of all time.
It was a circus.
It was a nightmare.
It's a miracle.
The phenomenal success of Rumours put pressure on the band to come up with a worthy follow-up, a pressure that Lindsey Buckingham felt more than anyone else. They started recording what would become the double album, Tusk.
He was hell-bent that this record would be nothing like Rumours, and it was nothing like Rumours. Mick and Lindsey put a lot of time into making sure it was nothing like Rumours. And then when we went in to do it, suddenly we were in like this wild native burial ground at the top of the sacred mountain in Africa, doing this record called Tusk, with this wild cover with the dog trying to tear somebody's leg off.
We were out of our minds, you know, we were on top of the world, we were fabulously wealthy. Anything we wanted, we could get. We never left the planet, you know, but we tried fairly hard to.
The two girls were getting really, really fed up with going there at 2 in the afternoon, staying up until 6 or 7 the next morning, and having to be back there at 2, because they just wanted to live there.
Throughout the late 70s and early 80s, the band embarked on several lengthy and exhausting tours. Fleetwood Mac became a byword for on-the-road luxury.
We had limos for the road managers. 14 limos would meet our plane at the airport. A whole row of them. It was like a funeral.
Stevie would like a grand piano in a room. But it's 9 stories up. Oh, yeah, put it through the window.
Fleetwood Mac traveled on beautiful airplanes, stayed in incredible hotels, had limousines, had anything they wanted. And it was wonderful.
Fleetwood Mac were at the height of their fame, and individual members wanted to pursue careers outside the confines of the band. The first to do so was Stevie Nicks.
3 songs every 3 years wasn't enough for me, because I wrote every night.
That's when it started to fall apart, I think, because of, you know, Stevie wanted to go this way, Lindsey wanted to do this, Chris wanted to do that. And they had the means to do it, i.e. financial. That was sort of the disintegration of the band as a unit.
Stevie's first solo LP, Belladonna, sold over 5 million copies, but it proved to be a bone of contention between her and Lindsey Buckingham.
I took Lindsey in a copy of the record right when it was fresh off the press, and I signed it and said a lot of really wonderful things to him. And I set it up on the console, and he moved it and put it down on the floor, just kind of leaning against one of the steps in the studio room. And I watched him all day long. I watched him from like 3 in the afternoon until 3 or 4 the next morning. And he walked right out of that room without the record. And I never forgave him for that.
Like Stevie, the rest of the band pursued solo projects in the mid-1980s. They came back together in 1987 to record the album Tango in the Night, which proved a great success. But, as so often in Fleetwood Mac, the guitarist was having problems.
The album came out, and the rest of us going, we've got to go on the road. We've just made a great album, we're going to not push it. And he agreed to do it against his better judgment, and that all went wrong. We'd set the whole tour up, and suddenly, boom, I can't do this, I can't face it.
Because of that guilt I have always had about not leaving Fleetwood Mac, I flew off of the couch and across the room to seriously attack him. And I did. I mean, and I'm not real scary, but I can be fairly ferocious. And I grabbed him, you know, which almost got me killed.
It got ugly. Physically ugly.
He ended up chasing me all the way out of Christine's maze-like house and down the street and then back up the street, and then he threw me against the car and I screamed horrible obscenities at him. And I thought he was going to kill me, and I think he probably thought he was going to kill me too. And I said to him, you know, if the rest of the people in the band don't get you, my family will. My dad and my brother will kill you.
I just said that, Lindsay, why don't you just leave? He left. But what I meant was, why don't you just leave the room? That's true.
Every single one of the guitar players had to reach the point where they said, I can't do this anymore. Chris and I have way too much of a practical side to ever say that. But the guys are like tenuous, always.
Lindsay Buckingham left to pursue a solo career. The previous guitarist, Bob Welch, on leaving the band had had considerable success with his LP French Kiss. Several more records followed, but by the end of the 80s, Bob found himself becoming ever more detached from everyday life.
I began to become a little bit isolated in my Hollywood Hills home, and at one point I was living in a hotel a couple of blocks down from my house, and the reason I was living in a hotel is because there were so many other people that I didn't know living in my house. I'd come back to my house at 4 o'clock in the morning, and somebody would be walking down the stairs and say, who are you? And I'd say, who are you? I'm Bob, this is my house, you know, please.
In Fleetwood Mac, Billy Burnett and Rick Vito had replaced Lindsay Buckingham. But in 1992, a request came from the White House for the Rumours lineup to reform for Bill Clinton's inaugural ball. Stevie had trouble persuading Lindsay Buckingham to agree.
President Clinton wants us to sing one of our songs that he's been listening to since he heard it in a cab 12 years ago. It's important to him. It's important to me. Please do this. And he kind of, you know, took a couple of days and hemmed and hawed around and finally said he'd do it. And when we went and we did it, and there was 18,000 people there. It was a big deal. It was like a big-time rock and roll concert.
Ladies and gentlemen, performing together for the first time since 1982, Lindsay Buckingham, Mick Fleetwood, Christine McVie, John McVie and Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac.
If you wake up and don't smile, if it takes just a little while, open your eyes and look at the day, you'll see things in a different way. Don't stop.
The concert marked the end of Stevie's time in Fleetwood Mac. She left and continued her solo career. For her, the Rumours lineup of the band had been its high point.
It's just not replaceable. You know, Mick can go on forever and ever trying to replace it, but he can't. It never will happen, never. So I just didn't want to go through the grief of trying to create something out of something that had already been, and had already been about as big as you could get.
She sort of filtered herself out, like enough was enough. And that turned ugly too. We're her worst enemies, from what I read. Mick is, all that Fleetwood Mac's ever done to her is bad things. It's just sort of boring and untrue. So she's.
A new lineup was put together featuring Dave Mason and Rebecca Bramlett. Christine McVie retired from the public gaze, but still writes for the band. The original rhythm section of John McVie and Mick Fleetwood sees no point in stopping now.
I am happiest checking into a hotel, finding my nice clean bathroom with clean sheets, clean towels, little free toothpaste, and a gig that night. I'm really not joking. Darling, I love you, but I also, that is where I'm most comfortable.
Make myself think we're a pretty good rhythm section, And what else do we do?
As a bizarre postscript to the Fleetwood Mac story, in 1994 it was revealed that an Essex farmer had been passing himself off as Peter Green, fooling several respected figures in the music industry. It seemed that the tragic character of Peter Green still fascinated the public. The surviving members of Fleetwood Mac could not forget him either.
I hadn't spoken to him in that's 15 years. I got close 2 weeks ago. But still sort of scares me.
When you say you got close, was that?
Well, I got his phone number.
And you were tempted to?
Oh, yeah. But, I chickened out.
I think they always felt like he had been stolen from them somehow. By something, that he had just been stolen away.
Mick talks to him a lot. He tells me about it, but I just like that picture of Greenie. Nothing will stop me. The player.
Now when I talked to God, I knew he'd understand. He said, stick by me and I'll be your guiding hand. But don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer that you want me to.
Another rock family tree next Saturday at 9 here on BBC Two, tracing the musical careers of some of Birmingham's finest.